Welcome to Student Affairs Live. I'm your host, Tony Doody, and I'm pleased to be joining you from my professional home at Rutgers University. We broadcast on the Higher Ed Live network. You can tune in to Student Affairs Live along with my amazing friend and co-host, Heather Shea Gasser, this fall on Wednesdays at 1 o'clock Eastern Time. Be sure to stay with us till the end of the show to hear about the great lineup we have scheduled for the next few months. In a moment, I'll introduce you to our distinguished guests, but we can't do that without first giving a shout out to the sponsors that make Student Affairs Live possible. Higher Ed Live is sponsored and produced by M. Stoner, a marketing communication firm that works with education institutions on branding, strategy, web design, and more. Student Affairs Live is also sponsored by ACPA, College Student Educators International. ACPA's strategic partnership with Higher Ed Live calls attention to the pairing of innovative professional development delivery with the strength of a renowned professional association. ACPA publishes the Journal of College Student Development and About Campus. Join ACPA President Gavin Henning at the 2015 Presidential Symposium live or virtually by clicking on the link that we're tweeting out now. Speaking of tweeting out now, I also want to take a moment to give a shout out and thanks to Val Haruska, monitoring today's back channel from her professional home at Indiana University Bloomington. Although, as she points out, her real home is here in New Jersey, from Edison, New Jersey, I believe. Finally, I'm pleased to have join me today three trend centers that are well known to most of you. Always provocative, fun, and inspiring. You can check out their full and impressive biographies on the Higher Ed Live website post for today's show. TJ, Julie, and Paul, welcome to today's episode. I'm looking forward to the conversation. Some of my favorite people I know will be joining us in the Twitterverse today, and you are some of my favorite people. Can we start off, we'll go left to right, can we start off by briefly describing your role and background, and also share with us your best or worst memory about student housing back when you were an undergrad. And audience members, I encourage you to join the conversation by sharing one of your memories on Twitter. So let's start off with Julie. You're left to right in my screen, at least.
All right. Well, good morning still? No, afternoon now. I'll get that right eventually. I'm Julie Payne-Kirchmeier, Associate Vice President for Student Affairs at Northwestern. My background, particularly with housing, is a pretty long one. Started out at Lamar University after grad school from Texas A&M as a hall director, then University of Southern Indiana, where I held subsequent roles up to and including the Director of Housing, became the Director of Housing at Southern Illinois University Carbondale, and currently my role in the portfolio actually oversees housing. So all of those things come together. I like to call myself steeped in housing and committed to student affairs. But when we talk about a memory, from an undergrad day, I remember vividly, let's just say my first roommate experience was, we will call it challenging. I remember trying to work it out with the RA, so I did what we would expect our students to do. You mediate, you try all of that. It didn't work, so my roommate and I parted ways appropriately, and then we were on the same floor still. I came back, and the RA was beating on her door. She had barricaded herself in the room because they told her she was going to have a roommate, and she flat out refused. And so that was an interesting exchange, I will say, and watching the stress that put on the RA, I had a lot of empathy for her at that point in time. That probably shapes my perspective on how I work with RAs now.
Excellent. Paul, you're up.
All right, Paul Wuennenberg. I am a principal with KWK Architects. We're based in St. Louis. I've had the really fortunate opportunity to work with student housing and student dining for the last 20 years. I pretty much just focused on that. Right now, we currently have close to 7,000 beds either under construction or in design. Again, I feel very fortunate to have this opportunity. What I like to think about in terms of designing spaces is not so much just, obviously, the shelter aspect, but also creating a stage set for social interactions and future memories. So that's really exciting. My personal experience, when I was in a res hall in undergrad, I remember spending a lot of time with the people in the hallway, sitting in the hallway after dinner. That was our main community space. And it was ironic because we had a huge lounge 200 feet down the hallway, but we spent all of our time sitting in the hallway outside our rooms. And that really has influenced me a great deal in terms of interaction and where do you place social space within a community. So that's the one memory I still live with to this day.
Great. TJ?
Good afternoon. I'm TJ Logan. I'm the Director of Housing for Administrative Services here at the University of Florida. We're a comprehensive, large operation here in the southeastern United States. My background in housing, I've been in housing my entire career, always on the business side for the most part, started really in student leadership roles that led into professional opportunities and roles, and then landed here at the University of Florida, where now I oversee all of the business operations within the comprehensive housing operation. My best memory, I'm going to go with it, it's probably a sweeter memory than what Julie shared. You know, in my sophomore year, I will never forget the first day of my sophomore year, and I did live on campus all 4 years of my undergraduate experience. I saw a young lady down the hallway, and I remember leaning over to my roommate and saying, "That's the girl I'm going to marry," and today we still are, and have 3 beautiful children many, many, many years later. So the residence halls have been a wonderful place in my life, including putting my family together for me. So it's very near and dear to my heart.
Wow, that's a great story. So I know, Paul, I'm going to ask you this question. I know that we've got some folks that are viewing who aren't necessarily res life or housing professionals. So can you explain some of the differences between traditional rooms, adjoining suites, super suites, whatever the flavor of the day is, and what types are on the rise and which types are declining now?
Sure, and the nomenclature does shift a little bit from institution to institution, but I like to, for my own use, traditional doubles and singles are individual bedrooms with a community bath down the hall, something we see quite a bit in the buildings that were built in the 50s and 60s. Double semi-suites and single semi-suites, those are 2 bedrooms with a shared bathroom in between. Then you move up to suites, where there's individual bedrooms, a shared bath, and an internal living room. Then a super suite, which usually introduces a small kitchenette. And then you go to an apartment, which introduces a full kitchen into the mix. You know, what I'm seeing is really kind of a falling away of semi-suites and suites to some degree. There's been a rethinking, especially in terms of a freshman experience. We were putting freshmen in semi-suites quite a bit 10 years ago, and you know, it allowed them to be somewhat insular. They could go in and not come out of their rooms. So really, and I would mark it at the 21st Century Project really did kind of have a bit of a paradigm shift where the onslaught of pods came up, you know, really taking kind of a suite atmosphere and turning it inside out, where you have a group of bedrooms with a shared bathroom, with a larger population, with maybe 10 or 12 students, and then also a living space to those 10 or 12 students, but it's open to the larger community. And that goes back, again, to my comment growing up, or spending time in the res hall, and my own experience of spending time in the hallway and providing social space right outside the individual bedrooms, almost like a front porch, so to speak. I think has a great deal of benefit of, especially with freshmen, of meeting each other and getting them out of their rooms. So that's something I see growing quite a bit. And then apartments, of course, are still for upperclassmen typically, and those I see bedrooms growing a little bit more with a push towards double beds in the bedrooms and competing with off-campus product. So those are the kind of things I'm seeing.
Great. So the title of today's show is Trends in Housing. So I want to get right to it. We'll cycle through each of our guests and ask you to share a few trends that you're following over the course of the next few years. Julie, you want to start us off?
Sure, I'll start with a couple, and Paul alluded to some of them, and it's really that rethinking of what a facility design would look like based on where a student may be in their own kind of development. So this adjustment back to some more shared spacing for first-year students and transitioning up to the apartment living for your juniors and seniors, because they're more comfortable in the environment, they navigate that environment more easily than when they first start. I also think that one of the things we don't often talk about, but that's occurring, and Paul can probably speak to this a little bit more, is that more and more community colleges, as they develop bachelor's programs are also looking at, and some of them are establishing, either on their own or through public-private partnerships, housing programs. And that's a game changer. In that community colleges used to be, and still to a large part are, that kind of transitional population of I come to campus at night and then I go home, or for an hour here or there, and now they're becoming more residential, and I think that's interesting, and I'm curious to see how this plays out. And then there's that whole balance of market-driven versus what we know as educators students need. We're always walking a little bit of that tightrope, so that we know what a first or a second-year student may need when it comes to what Paul described, those progressive levels of community within a facility. But then students are demanding different things from us and what they want to see. And so how do you walk that tightrope?
Yeah, and we'll get into that question later on about the growing amenity expectations of our students. TJ, you want to offer up a few trends?
No, I think to that point, and right along with what Paul and Julie have said, there is certainly a movement in design, and part of what I think we're seeing is looking back in time a little bit and reintroducing really intentional academic partnerships into residence hall facilities in ways that we haven't seen for a really long time. I know Paul either recently did or is working on a very cool project in the state of Oklahoma, I think, that looks like a really old residential college model. And they're taking a look at what is the value of really strong academic partnerships and bringing those back into the residence halls is one trend. Another trend, and Paul mentioned the 21st Century Project, which is a project out of Aku, Hawaii. Another trend that I think has come out of that is a real push by housing operations to push back on what the university or campus building standard has called for in the past. We've always been called upon to build these 100-year-old buildings, these 100-year buildings, these battleships that'll stand up to the test of time. And what we're learning in the field is that we really don't know what students are going to need in 10 years, what they're going to need in 20 years. And so how are we building facilities that are able to be responsive to what the needs of students are as they continue to progress and change? And sometimes that may not be a 100-year building with a clay tile roof and some other pieces and parts. So I know a number of institutions and housing operations out there who have really pushed a little bit to see if they can make some adjustments within what the building standard calls for on their campus to make sure that their building can remain relevant over time.
Great. Paul?
Yeah, the one thing I'm really interested in is the evolution, and it may sound strange, but of the bathroom.
Yeah.
Just started a project at the University of Missouri where we're doing a unisex communal bathroom. And the bathroom is defined by geography and not gender. And I think that's interesting. They just opened a res hall with that configuration, and with my preliminary focus groups with students, they seem to have adjusted well to that. But it's very interesting because if you think about inclusiveness of both ADA but also transgender, of dealing with students in transition, of not having to decide, well, is that a male or female, that is the bathroom. And then within the bathroom, those are private bathrooms. So you still have the opportunity for building community, brushing teeth, etc. in the larger space, but you do have the privacy within that bathroom that's not defined specifically. And I think that's really interesting, and I think that's going to be something that we'll see more of in the future.
Great. Now, I know you had a longer list, Julie. Do you want to jump back in with any?
We could, I think the three of us could probably talk about this for the entire hour, and I know there's more for you to cover, but just kind of following up on Paul's point about inclusiveness, the other challenge and I think thing that we are constantly needing to keep in mind is that when we, not if, but as we renovate or redesign or build new, that we are being intentional about designing facilities that don't price out those who may not be able to afford it. So yes, we can throw everything into this facility, but if at the end of the day it's too expensive, that's not really connected to the overall mission of the institution and of the overall philosophy of developing a true community. So that's another balance point for us.
Great.
So.
I just want to remind viewers, if I didn't say it earlier, you're welcome to send in questions. Val is monitoring the back channel. We've got lots of questions to get to, so no worries there. But if you've got them, we'll try and introduce some of them into the show. Now, Julie, TJ referred to the difficulty of trying to project 10 years into the future, but we do have an idea, I think, an idea of how today's student is different than students of a decade or two ago? Now, I know you just got out of undergrad 2 or 3 years ago,
Yes.
so it'll be hard for you to project that. But how are the housing needs different of today's student than of a decade ago?
Number one, first and foremost, the demand for technology, and I don't just mean I have a port in my room to plug my wire into. I need enough power. The Wi-Fi has to go fast enough. I expect that any security systems are going to be at their highest and best quality. That, I think, is different than 10 years ago when we would be able to advertise and say, we have a port per pillow and call it a day. That doesn't work anymore. I also think that students don't want to be tethered anywhere. So when you think about things like introducing cable into a building, there are students coming now who stare at you like, we've not had cable in my house for 3-4 years. I watch everything on my laptop or my portable device, and so we have to be setting these systems up to accommodate that. And that impacts things like contracts with cable companies who are going to provide that service, or for some campuses who have their own cable service, which is fascinating. That's now antiquated, so what's next? I also think that we're seeing students now, interestingly enough, that are far more comfortable sharing things. That, as these students are coming in, first and second year students, they're not coming with their own car, their own microwave. They're coming and really planning thoughtfully with their roommate or suite mates that I'm going to bring one of something, and it's totally cool if you all want to share it. Now, I realize that contextually on different campuses that may change, but it's starting to weave its way through, and that's what we're seeing with high school students and even junior high students, that they're coming in with this perspective of community sharing. You think about things like Airbnb. Right. And that's the norm now, or zip cars, or shared cars, or divvy bikes. And we're going to have to figure out ways to capture that in the residential community.
Did you say divvy bikes?
Divvy. It's the bike sharing program. It's one of several.
Got it. So, TJ, Julie alluded to this a little bit, and you have always been someone I've admired for being at the cutting edge of technology. And back in the day, I'll just be truthful, probably most of us hung an antenna outside their window. For me, I was fortunate I had this massive 21-inch tube TV that we would crowd in. Yeah, it was impressive. We'd have people crowd in to watch football games or watch what I would undisputedly claim to be the best TV show of all time, which was Miami Vice. So we'd have Miami Vice watching parties. Then institutions started to move to cable TV, and a lot of money started to be spent on cable contracts and infrastructure. And as Julie pointed out, it seems like today's students are getting a lot more of their content via the web through services like Netflix, Hulu, HBO Now. What are some of the other expectations other than wireless that students might expect these days?
Yeah, when we think about technology in the residence halls, we always think about it from two different perspectives. One is from the amenity side, so what are the things that students expect or would like that add value to their living experience, they make it better for them. And I think you're hitting the nail on the head with the things you're talking about. You talk about streaming content from the web via Hulu and things like that. Online gaming is a massive part of what we are seeing and trying to accommodate, not just at Florida, but for my colleagues around the country. It's how do we accommodate online gaming, because there's a bandwidth need for that. And so we've seen students actually going back to the port off of the wireless connection and going back to the reliability of the port for the purpose of gaming. And it puts us in a position, when you do talk wireless, to really start to think about quality of service models, QoS models, for who gets what content when, and what takes precedence and what's more important. That gets you to the flip side. So you talk about the amenity side. Right now there's a whole different side, and that's the need side. When we've all seen that joke where wireless is added to the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and there's a reality of that for our students, and it's not just anecdotal. It's just that students believe they need wireless or believe they need network access for their phones or for their iPads or whatever it is. The most recent data that I presented at a Kuhuai, as recently as 2012, more than a third of every college student was taking at least one class online. So think about it from a need perspective. It's not just I need it from an amenity side. I need it to support my academic work here. We've taken the residence hall and it's become the classroom in some instances and in a third of the instances. And so when we look at that, we've shifted to a place where we need to support students, not just police them. You know, if you remember really 10, 20 years ago, as you think about what we were focused on at the time, it was about DMCA violations. It was about making sure everybody was configured correctly. It was about watching for behavior. And now we're at a place where we're pretty good at that. We've got that pretty well figured out, and there are a lot of software solutions out there to assist you to do that. It's what are we doing to up our game in supporting student success, and the networks become a part of that, which is a really interesting paradigm shift, because it used to be an amenity, now it's part of supporting student success, even academically.
So, Paul, somewhat related to technology, I want to address the issue of security for a minute. And I've been in our own public safety office, and I'm blown away. It seems like there are hundreds, if not thousands, of cameras that are connected to our public safety building. And it reminds me a little bit about the George Orwell book, 1984, and the fact that Big Brother is always watching. So is it reasonable to suggest that privacy, at least outside of the bedroom, is gone? And as someone who helps design buildings, how do you weigh privacy versus safety in building these days?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because it's a microcosm of what we're dealing with larger in society, with the onslaught of drones and cameras and street corners. What I find is it's very easy to place cameras, and most institutions are placing cameras wherever they think they're vulnerable, at entry doors, at front desks, etc. But I find most of them are not monitored. They're there for investigation. So if something went wrong, they could go back to the tape. And there's a liability issue with that, obviously. If you're monitoring it and some attack happens, then what responsibility does the university have about stopping it, etc.? But personally, I like to think that wherever you could be watched by the public, so to speak, in hallways, the entry desk, at the entry to the building, I feel fairly comfortable. But once you breach that point where you believe you have privacy, and in terms of what is expected societally, whether it's in your unit, bathrooms, etc., that I really do believe is off limits. But any space, I think, that someone could see you and you have an acceptance of the fact that somebody could see you, then cameras, I think, fall into it. And the benefit it outweighs the loss of privacy from the safety standpoint.
Excellent. So I got a question sent in from Places for Students, and it's asking about amenities. And we talked briefly about this earlier. TJ, institutions are always competing against these newer off-campus options that have this huge array of high-profile amenities. I read that North Carolina State just built an apartment complex that has an oasis saltwater pool with a splash deck, outdoor courtyards with TVs, fire pits, grills, art studio, 2-story game room, a fitness center, and 2 tanning rooms. And at TJ, I read that Landmark is building a $100 million project at University of Florida that includes a hotel, indoor golf lounges, Starbucks, fitness center, VIP floor, rooftop pool, and a private sauna. At what point is this too much? Why should institutions provide these kind of accommodations that really seem far from the academic mission?
Well, first, and I saw Julie's face when you talked about some of the things that Landmark is doing. First, to be clear, that's not a University of Florida project. That's a project near the University of Florida that's being privately constructed. It'll be privately managed. To be honest, Tony, I'm not sure that. I think we have gone a little bit too far, and I think some of the things that you've heard today, just even from Paul talking about bathroom spaces and sort of backing away from apartments and more private suites and getting into smaller community type spaces, and what Julie talked about in terms of students really being a little bit more coordinating, being willing to share. I think what we're starting to see is a little bit of a renaissance in housing where we're ready to back away from the amenities race. You know, at Florida, for example, you know, you're not going to see us compete from a product perspective with that landmark property. That is not the product that we provide. We are competing for the same market. We don't have an on-campus housing requirement, so we're truly competing for the same market, but we are not competing with the same product. And so when we think about amenities, and I know a lot of my colleagues around the country feel the exact same way, when we think about amenities, we think about what are the amenities that are going to support your experience here and add value to your success. So an amenity at the University of Florida might be a naval ship simulator that's part of the ROTC Living Learning community. That is an amenity that adds value to their experience. It's something they can't get off campus. Is it a stainless steel refrigerator? Is it a granite countertop? Is it a 52-inch LCD flat screen on the wall or a tanning bed? It's not. But and I'll probably talk about this as we go on too, but the relationship that we have with parents now especially has helped inform that these types of amenities are more important for the product that we're trying to put forward. So when I think about the amenities race, I really think that we've seen a shift very, very recently and a little bit of a renaissance in moving towards amenities that truly support student success and away from amenities that are just what I would call vanity amenities, the things that are comfort amenities. I don't think you're going to see another lazy river built around a residence hall for a long time. But there was a time when there was that race to do those types of things.
Is there a university that has a lazy river?
There is, yes. North Florida. Sorry, Paul.
That was a comment back to our current executive director of residential services who used to be there. I really quickly, I couldn't agree more with what TJ is saying, is that the amenities really come back to how are we adding value to that student experience academically and through connections to different resources they need on campus. And that connection that we have and the educational process that we can go through with the families really helps to drive some of that home far better than any marketing brochure we could ever use.
You got it.
Yeah, and I wouldn't underestimate students as well. It's very interesting because working at Notre Dame, we did focus groups, and the students were very clear, look, I don't want a private bathroom. I want a public bathroom because that's part of the experience. I want to meet my fellow students. I want to, they understood the importance of building community. And I was quite surprised at their sophistication of what they wanted.
We got that same response here at Northwestern, particularly for first years.
But I think part of that, though, when you say don't underestimate students, is who are our students today? The number of first-time or first-generation students in college as a percentage of all college students is almost half of what it was 40 years ago. So their expectations of what the college experience is informed by what their parents' college experience is. I'm shocked every day by how many students come here and expect to live in a traditional double room in a double-loaded corridor because that's what mom and dad told them college was like. And I think that's a good thing. I think we're finally sort of back around to that, where that's part of that college experience, and that allows us to focus on those amenities that are really out there to support student success.
So let's focus in on students for a moment. You all have contacts through day-to-day or through focus group with students. What are they most complaining about, and what are they most excited about? We'll ask, everyone can jump in here.
Well, one of the things that sounds very mundane, but I hear from focus groups all over the country, one of the big complaints, and as strange as it sounds, is door closers. With new construction, we have rated walls, and the doors have to close automatically, and I hear over and over that that's a problem because obviously there's that nonverbal communication of opening your door and saying you're open for business, so to speak. You want to have interaction with people walking by, etc. So we've actually, in the state of Indiana, worked with the State Fire Marshal to do some variances to get away from having to have closers by having actual RAs or RDs come through and make sure all the doors are closed at night while students are sleeping. But that way it allows them to have their doors open during the day. And in terms of positive aspects, going back to this amenities thing, I don't see, in terms of students being excited about widgets and the latest thing in res halls, I see them really still excited about opportunities for learning and opportunities for interaction. So however best we can facilitate that stage set for students to interact, that is what they're there for in college, and they're most excited about.
And Paul, to sort of jump on that idea, I think it's less about amenities, less about physical space. The things that we see students and their parents, who are very vocal as well, excited about is when we have positioned ourselves to be really transparent about what the experience is, about what they should expect, aligning expectations with realities, and we've made that shift. You know, the thing that students get most excited about that we send them today is the measurements of the room. And when I say measurements, I mean, what is the measurement from the floor to the bottom of the bed? What can I store under there? They're down to that level of detail on every single room. And they get excited when you're transparent enough to be able to provide that. And you're not focused on some of the things that are smoke and mirrors. And so I agree with you, Paul. I think it's less about those amenities and those widgets and those other things, and it's more about what is the relationship you're entering into with students and with their parents, and what is the way that you're communicating with them, and does that transparency translate into what their experience might be.
I would also add to that the thing that we see students getting excited about is when the experience itself is positive. So the contributions that our staff make to what that experience is, when a staff member can interact with them in a way that helps them either discover something or connect with something they've needed, or just helps them out in a moment of crisis. Those are the times when you have students and parents and family members emailing you saying thank you so much. So that care and compassion of the staff can't be lost when we're only talking about, when we talk about trends in housing, because that's such a huge part of the experience for them. For us, though, I think the number one complaint is, please, God, make the Wi-Fi faster. That's what we get all the time.
Yeah, make the network faster. And when I talk about that product that we sell and how it's a different product than the off-campus product, that's the product. That's 50% of it. Not just the physical building, but what is that positive experience? What are you going to have with us relationship-wise? Yeah.
So how do you market these days? How do you market that experience, that product? Ideas, diagrams. I mean, I love the idea of sharing some of the details, like you noted, TJ, about the bed distance. What are some methods? Julie, you got some ideas?
So one of the things that I think is interesting is there are universities out there that are kind of piloting this tour experience, and it's not, okay, there's nothing that replaces a student being able to go in that room, walk through it, see it, touch everything, and then leave, because then they get a better sense of where they're going to be living, even if it's not the exact space. But self-guided tours on campus that use an app, and as somebody is walking through campus and they point their device, their mobile device, at a building, and they can see what a room looks like in there, and maybe then there's a video of some students, not the staff, students talking about what it's like to be there. That's huge for them. And as universities continue to evolve with how we market, really balancing that, what TJ referred to earlier, we don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. We want to be transparent. We want to be accurate, but do it in a way that they can hear it and see it and it makes sense for them. So I think that's one way I can see technology kind of connecting with that. How do we share that story? We've seen campuses develop student blogs throughout the year so that students can go online and they're investigating housing, and there's a call out saying, hey, this is what it's like to live here. They click on it and they can read a whole host of student stories about that experience. So that experience-based marketing versus look at the outside of the building, isn't it pretty, seems to go a little bit further.
And I think you have to do it from two perspectives. I think you have to showcase your rooms, whether it be through tours or through the technology that Julie talked about, really well-produced videos, the online renderings that people can work their way through. I think that's all great and important, and I still think you have to do that from a marketing perspective as an organization. But I think the other door that we've started to open that's a really important door is that door for students to self-report and give them the opportunity. So from a tech perspective, we've gone from the most popular videos being our high production, really nice, clean, finished videos to the ones that students are doing and posting on Facebook, or the ones their parents are doing during a campus visit and posting on Facebook. Those are the places, and so what are the channels that we're giving them, or the ways that we're giving them to spread that message and sort of share that? And there's something genuine about it, there's something real about it. And so I think you have to do both. I think you have to be able to approach it in both directions, and both of those showcase your product in different ways, I think.
I like that letting go of the control of the message, right? So that you're paying more attention to the experience that you're giving in the product that you have, so that the message that comes out, no matter who is telling the story, is far more likely to be positive. That's great.
So I know Northwestern and University of Florida are doing a great job at marketing. Are there some other schools that you might point folks to check out?
You know, off the top of my head, I think USF is doing a really, really nice job from a marketing perspective. If you look at their marketing pieces and parts, they do a very nice job. Oregon State has always done a really nice job with marketing, particularly in social media. They were one of the first groups who got in the game from an Instagram perspective and did it right and really did some really nice pieces and parts. I've seen some good Snapchat stuff out there too. Snapchat's sort of the new technology that is really hard to measure, but I think gives people a nice look into a really genuine look at your facilities and things like that. Those are the ones that come just to the top of my head, but I'm sure there's a whole lot more that we could probably list out.
Yeah, I do think that there's and this goes back to TJ talking about that connection of the curricular to the co-curricular. There are campuses that have generated or developed these really intentional residential commons. SMU just opened one this year where they built the entire facility all at once. Their website on how they rolled that out is really great.
Yeah.
You know, short videos, narratives, all sorts of things, so that when it became, you know, real, those students really understood what was going on.
So, Julie, I saw you sneak a sip of water there, and it reminded me of a question that got sent earlier last week, asking us to address specifically issues of water usage and sustainability, particularly for universities west of the Mississippi. Paul, can you talk briefly about some of these issues and perhaps give our audience a brief primer on LEED certification?
Sure. LEED actually stands for Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design, and it was developed by the U.S. GBC, or U.S. Green Building Council, and it was a rating system to try to help guide the construction operations and maintenance of buildings. So how we use our resources in general, how we create healthy environments, are both very much into it. Now, it's not a perfect system, but it certainly is a great way to begin to think about the various aspects of building. And you talked about water. There's a section on water resource where you know, there's low flow plumbing fixtures. There's xeriscape where there's non-irrigated landscaping. There's a number of, even at Minnesota, I worked on a project where we captured all of the rainwater and are using it for the toilets because it actually, the site required no runoff, so we had to capture the runoff, and we actually used it inside the building. But it's global. It's also talking about energy usage, renewable energy, you know, in terms of using photovoltaics and solar hot water. I think all of that has been really good, and what I've found typically is that, you know, doing good design, and with really most university standards, you hit a silver level right off the go. So in terms of a cost benefit analysis, you know, it makes a lot of sense, because a lot of those decisions, while there might be slightly more upfront cost, will pay off tremendously in the 30-year life cycle. So the amount of energy used, maintenance, etc., plus the intangibles of what it's like living in an environment with healthy air, with natural light, and what that does to the psyche and you know, the space that you live within.
Great. Anyone else have any comments about the issues facing our colleagues out west?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the water usage, it goes quite, you know, specifically into that, and again, go back to those examples I used of having landscape with zero irrigation, of capturing rainwater and runoff to actually use within plumbing systems. One of the things that we found is that the technology might be slightly ahead of some of the local code officials. So, you know, capturing rainwater, how do you negotiate the proper cleaning of that from bacteria, et cetera, to be able to be used either for irrigation or internally as gray water within the buildings. But, you know, it talks at great length, LEED, in terms of water usage and how to reduce that. There's been great advancement also with industry. Because of LEED, there's a lot of innovation out there with plumbing fixtures. You know, it used to be a low-flow faucet or a low-flow shower head was the disdain of everyone taking a shower, but now there's, you know, technology that increases velocity without increasing volume of water. So again, every little bit certainly helps in terms of water usage. And luckily, the technology is really advancing because of the LEED requirements to help save water.
I think. Oh, go ahead, TJ.
Well, I was
Sorry.
going to say another thing that I've seen in terms of water usage and even electrical usage that's been popular and I think successful is really that transparency piece again. So I see a number of buildings. You walk in, there's a flat screen, and it talks about usage in the building. What's being used right now? What's historical usage? How does that compare to another building on campus? I've seen campuses that do really successful programs around rewarding saving of water or electrical or something like that, and utilizing that digital display to be able to do that. And I think by making it a community issue rather than an administrative issue, you have some opportunities to do a whole lot with what you already have in your system. So while the LEED piece and while designing makes a whole lot of sense, but sometimes you're stuck with building. How do you make the best of what you have? And part of that is involving the community. So I've seen a lot of really great successful efforts there as well.
And that's exactly where I was going to go with that. It's really that the involvement. We're in a mind meld here. That's how this is working. But it's that, how are we involving the community? And quite frankly, our students are coming expecting this now. And so, you know, they're asking us questions, which is great. And I know several of us have either thematic or living learning communities that are clustered around sustainability, and they are then going out and further educating their peers. One of the neat things about some of the things that TJ just described is that we are ending up leading other areas of the institution in that effort. So you walk into a residence hall and you see that kind of display or that kind of programming. How does that then influence the design of a new university center? How does that influence the design of a new rec center or an academic building? And then how do you take that and then infuse it back into the curriculum in a way that can then be supported by faculty and other students with projects? So it's a really great kind of overall connection of the full university, and I love it.
Yeah, and a building can only do so much. So much of this is behavior, and how do you begin to skew behavior to being more sustainable? For instance, how long you stay in the shower. Do you leave your TV on while you're out of the room? Do you leave your fan coil with the heat running while you open your window? All of those things affect, and that's where holding, you know, accountability to wings, for instance, is really important. You get peer pressure involved. An interesting story at Stevens Point, Wisconsin. They provide recycle chutes, but no trash chutes. So you have to go out to the dumpster to throw your trash away. So again, that starts to say, you know, with behavior, think about recycling first before just throwing something away, because it could be brutally cold up there.
I love it. We can have intramural competitions for low energy use, right?
Yeah.
So I'm gonna ask.
5-minute shower competition will do for you.
So I'm going to ask the home audience to share their answer to this question as well on Twitter, while I ask our panel here the same question. What are some of the challenges, the biggest challenges that are facing housing professionals today?
Honestly, I think it's a few things. I think one challenge facing housing as a profession is quantifying the value of the residential experience, and I think it's really, really important for us as a field and for professionals within our field to seek out opportunities to build some contemporary research that helps quantify that. I believe in the residential experience and the importance that it has in supporting student success. I know that our panelists do. I know that everybody listening does. But there's not a lot out there in contemporary research to support that, and knowing what we've just all talked about in terms of the ways that our students have changed over the past 10 years, I think it's really important for us to do that. So that's one thing that comes to mind. I think supporting students from a variety of backgrounds, whether that be international students, we've got a lot more international students within our institutions than we ever have before, or students, whether it be LGBTQ or students with different religious backgrounds, finding ways within our housing operations to make sure that we're being inclusive. I think that's an important issue facing housing professionals right now, and being strategic in how we approach that is really important. I really do.
I think there are some elements too associated with that about how are we then training our staff to work with those issues. So, we all can probably go pull out an RA training schedule from 10 years ago and then pull out one maybe from this year, and you're going to see a lot of the same elements. But have we really kind of readjusted that training to talk about the things that TJ just walked through? And I think some areas have done a nice job of that, and others have not. I'm specifically concerned about mental health concerns of the students that are coming in, not necessarily the ones that, we're not counselors, that's not what we do, but things like anxiety and not being able to handle failure, because students are getting into these universities and colleges, and sometimes this is the first time that they've ever really experienced failure. So how are we then helping them with resiliency? I see a lot of pressure on staff to do things like that.
I don't want to exclude you, Paul, from this question. What are some of the challenges facing designers today as you work with institutions?
Well, I'll tell you the number one challenge always is budget and meeting expectations with limited resources. That's something we struggle with all the time. And how do you begin to prioritize what are absolutely needs versus wants? And walking that and not disappointing everyone, so that certainly is the number one challenge, and it's across the board. I mean, you could say, well, there's a $40 million project and they have issues with what they want versus with the resources, or there's a $5 million project and it's the same thing. So it's really trying to find the best value and what would provide for the best experience for the student.
Yeah, I think to piggyback on that a little, and you can start to see these things are all fitting together that we're talking about. It costs a lot to build a building, and especially when we think about building standards on university campuses and that idea of wants first needs. I think it's become increasingly important as we look at some of the situations across the country for housing officers and the field of housing to seek to understand how public-private partnerships work and how they don't work. And understand the concept that they're not all created equally, and really be strategic about those things. So I think that's an issue. I know from a Kuhuai's perspective that's an agenda item that we're very thoughtful about. So what is it that we're doing to help our profession understand public-private partnerships and what role they do and will play in our field in the future?
So I know it's hard to project 10 years into the future, but knowing that we need to continue with a foundation, and I know Kuhuai has a set of core competencies, what are some of the competencies that you think educators or housing and res life professionals will need to develop over the next decade?
I'll start with a couple. I really think we're going to continue to have to focus on technology as a competency, how we use it, how it's integrated into the living experience, how we use it behind the scenes to help make those processes that really result in the living experience smoother, more efficient. Even how we use it to solicit feedback or identify trends within our own housing community so that we can create programs, responses, or even be proactive with things like facility designs or adjustments in those kind of semi-flexible buildings that TJ was talking about earlier. I also think, though, this concept or the idea of sustainability as a competency with housing in particular is huge. I mean, we have colleagues that we can all name who actually have gone out and become LEED Green Associate certified and are moving into some of the AP credentials, and these are housing professionals because they want to understand better how the LEED requirements and more specifically sustainability can be integrated into these communities effectively so that it becomes a way of life and you educate students to be more responsible with resources as they move through your programs and then beyond.
Yeah, I think to tack on to that, financial literacy is a key competency that we need to continue to build for housing professionals. As we look at the boom in higher education that occurred, post World War II in our aging buildings right now, understanding the financial implications of trying to maintain some of these facilities, it's really an interesting challenge, and we're going to need housing officers in the future who can manage these comprehensive operations, who can understand the financial components of how the operation works, who can understand how a public-private partnership may or may not work on your campus, and can advocate for student housing as a field. If we're not educated in those areas, it's going to be really, really hard to advocate for our field the way that we need to.
How about the RA's role? Do we foresee a change in their role changing over the next 10 years?
I think we have to. I look at job descriptions much like I referenced training earlier. And when I look at job descriptions for RAs, they're still remarkably similar to what they were 20 years ago. We've got to rethink what it is those RAs should be doing, can do, and that what role they play that is most effective in creating the experience that our students need. I don't think we've really done that well as a profession, and I think it's something, I know that there's some conversation about doing that, but that's something that truly has to be taken care of. And I would also say that for our live-in hall director positions as well.
Paul, we've been talking about the concept of designing with the notion of inclusivity, and I know you could probably do an entire show or presentation on this topic, but can you briefly share some of the considerations and design strategies when it comes to accommodating students with disabilities?
Yeah, and oftentimes we immediately think about wheelchairs, but it's so much larger. Obviously, ADA has had a huge impact in residence hall design and financially, because quite honestly, there is a great deal more square footage necessary with contemporary buildings designed to ADA. And also the thing that's often looked over is the fact that FHA plays a part as well. So all the rooms, either type B FHA or ADA, all of that makes the spaces larger for accommodating it. But there's also things to think about in terms of having light signals, of strobes in the room, of bed shakers in terms of someone who is deaf and there's a fire. How do you wake them up? You're knocking on a door. If someone is hearing impaired, how do they hear that? There needs to be the idea of a flashing doorbell, so to speak. But also the idea of universal design. And that may even go to people who may not see as clearly as others. So start to think about carpet pattern and lighting and how you begin to facilitate wayfinding through a building by using the materials. I've seen some horrible situations where on a staircase, a shift of color, I have trouble. I almost trip, so you have to think about visually how to make the traversing the space as simple as possible and as clear as possible, because you do have people with poor eyesight. So it's a global issue beyond just purely wheelchair accessibility.
We just finished a project here in Florida that, upon its completion, is one of the most accessible buildings in the country, right up there along with the project at Champaign-Urbana. And the process that we went through in that building was unlike, it was so above and beyond what ADA is. And when you start to truly think about what does accessibility look like in a residence hall, how many of us consider how wide does a hallway need to be, not just for a wheelchair to pass a person, but for a wheelchair to pass a wheelchair? What does that look like? When you have buttons in an elevator that go up and down to the floor so that I can just roll into it, instead of having to try to extend a hand to a button that happens to be at a height that is ADA accessible. How many of us have thought about handedness and what hand might be stronger in a particular situation? So, we built sinks that actually move on the wall, left to right, to accommodate for handedness. We have one of 2 residence halls now that have a track system in the ceiling. So if you have a severe mobility impairment, it can take you to the shower, it can take you to the bathroom. You can use your Bluetooth phone to see who's ringing your doorbell, instead of getting up and going through what it takes to get to that door. When you think about going above and beyond ADA, you have to put yourself in a different mindset than what does the law tell me I have to do. And that's what I would challenge people to do, is think a little bit beyond that.
Also, things like electric wheelchairs. Where do you plug those in for recharge?
Power supply. Yeah.
Where do you store those? All of those things. Extra monitors for medical devices. Power for medical devices. That's come up, where having redundant or emergency power for certain outlets because someone has a monitor that is a medical monitor and needs to stay powered. So all of those things play into it.
Yeah.
What I love about this is that we're talking about ADA as it's an inclusive issue. It's not a I have to issue. When you start thinking about these as compliance issues, that's when you run into trouble. This is truly being inclusive in ways that like earlier we talked about individuals with low SES, or as Paul talked about with gender open housing or gender open restrooms. This is all backed up with a philosophy of inclusion, and in higher education, that's one of the principles that we should be holding near and dear to our hearts.
Yeah.
So I read yesterday in the Chronicle an article that talked about Texas A&M and their outsourcing of facilities management, and certainly that's not a new trend in housing or dining or even student unions and recreation. So what are some of the advantages and perils of doing that? And it's kind of tied to this. Lots of private public partnerships are starting to take place or have been taking place for some time now. What are the pros and cons to outsourcing and to doing these public-private partnerships?
So I think I'll start broadly, and others please jump in. I really think it depends on the partner that you get, right? So there are some really reputable companies out there that do public-private partnerships, and they do a great job. Their approach is rooted in student development. They staff the buildings appropriately. Their construction design is good. And so, they're thinking about all the things that we've been discussing for this past hour. And when you get that kind of a partner, I think depending on your own institutional context and need, then you really can do some amazing things, and the students still have the experience that we were describing. When you don't get that kind of a partner, when it's more of I'm a developer and I'm going to stick my toe in this student housing field, that's when we can run into some issues where they don't fully understand the scope of what student housing means. It's not just building 500 beds, throwing a couple staff members in there and calling it a day. This is not what students expect anymore. So for me, that's the contextual part of this. And when you get some of those folks that may have entered into a partnership that's not as positive, you run into problems with management, you run into problems with responsiveness, with construction design, quality, all of the things that you would think about, if you weren't really kind of controlling the process. But you get a good partner, it can go well. And the reality is that there are some campuses out there that this is how they can have student housing, or this is how they can build or refresh or regenerate their stock. And so what's the more important thing here? Is it to provide quality housing for your students so that they can learn? Absolutely.
Yeah, in terms of the partnership piece, I think one of the things that we miss often is making sure that we are a good partner. And part of us being a good partner is being an educated partner, and being that educated partner is what gets you a seat at the table. I hear so many, whether it be developers, architects, others, talk about projects that they've worked on where the residence life or even student affairs as a whole was not at the table, had no conversation on the project whatsoever. It was strictly a facilities and financial services project. And part of the reason that happens is because we've been very closed off to the idea. We've said all P3s are bad, we don't want anything to do with them, instead of learning how they can and cannot work, how they can and can be structured, what the benefits and drawbacks are, and earning yourself a seat at the table so that you can influence how that partnership looks. And so I think that's the big piece where we need to evolve, is to understand those pieces so that we can have a seat at the table. In terms of benefits, because you don't hear a lot of people espouse about the great benefits of public-private partnerships. I talked about building and construction standards. One of the things that we know you can get in a public-private partnership almost always is you can get faster, more affordable delivery of the product, and you can get a very similar product in terms of what you're going to have construction-wise and what it's going to look like and how it's going to hold up and how it's going to serve students. But you can only get there if you're at the table to be a part of that dialogue to make sure it meets your standards.
Yeah, it all comes down to how you write the RFQ, the guidelines, essentially. I mean, you're going to want to have input into what's delivered. I just participated in a 3P for Indiana, and they clearly stated that they want all of the standards of the building to meet their campus standards. So that's one way to afford the quality level that they want, but it's putting it out to the marketplace and the potential benefit of to the market in terms of bringing them the best value. But it's so important to write in what those important parameters are from the owner's standpoint, because it will go to the least common denominator if it's not clearly delineated.
Yep.
Now, as for facilities or housing, I can't really speak to that from the university. I've had experience with universities that have done that. I don't know how successfully they have. Certainly, from a dining standpoint, that's done all the time, and it's been done successfully. But I don't know from a housing standpoint. That seems to be a really kind of a desperate measure or a unique measure. I don't know. I'd be interested to see what Julie and TJ think.
Yeah, I get, when you talk about housing itself, I get back to my original statement, is that it's all contextual with the institution. Is this the way that they can build housing? Is this the most financially viable way? Getting back to how do we help our students who are least able to afford it be able to afford it? And if it's we build it ourselves, we may not be able to do that. So there's so many factors that go into this, but again, it all comes down to who's the partner and what's kind of, for me, their philosophical perspective. And I like what TJ added there about how are we as an institution involved in that process that will, I think, dictate the outcome.
So we're nearing the end of our time here. I just want to have you each take an opportunity, if you have some ideas, to share with the audience a few resources that they might check out to explore some of the issues. And you've covered such a range of issues here today in 30 seconds or less. TJ?
Sure. The Campus Housing Management book from Kuhuai. Did I steal yours, Julie?
You did. You did.
It is a comprehensive series of books, and it is really great because it's soup to nuts. It covers everything in terms of what managing a housing operation, and it's a really great resource. I have the full series right behind me on my desk and refer to it all the time. The other thing I want to make up for, the other marketing group that came to mind, Michigan State University Housing, does a phenomenal job with marketing, so shout out to them. I don't want to miss them as well.
I'll add to TJ's. I'll say, if you really want to kind of grab onto really great resources, go through Kuhuai. I mean, they are, with some of these certification programs that they're coming up with, the online learning that's happening, the different smaller conferences that occur around living learning communities, or the combined conference with APA. I mean, that's really fantastic information and ways that you can stay current on what the current issues are for housing. Along with that, it's the journal, I think. Kuhuai does a journal, and that's something that you can really grab onto when we start talking about, as TJ alluded to earlier, research in the field.
And I'll go back and just be redundant. This is fabulous. Orb and James put together that whole series was fabulous, and the facilities construction piece of it is really good. When you think about a resource that dovetails both the issues of res life, of students, and of construction, it's a wonderful resource.
Well, I can't tell you how much I've learned and how much fun I've had. And TJ, thanks for suggesting Paul today. I loved having your perspective on the show, Paul.
He's way smarter than me.
Well, three of the most talented, smartest people in the industry, for sure. I really appreciate you taking time out today. Coming up on October 7th, my colleague Heather Shea Gass will be hosting a show for Careers in Student Affairs Month, with guests Kent Porterfield, Armanda Parkman, Erica Thompson, Chris Mundell, Lori Patton-Davis, and Kathy Guthrie. And then I'll be back later in October with two shows. The first one will be on No Talking Heads, New Student Orientation Re-envisioned with Matthew Ferguson, Beth Lindgren-Clark, and Michelle Nightingale. And the second one will be later in October on the topic of executive searches. You can receive reminders about this and other great shows by subscribing to the Higher Ed Live newsletter or browse the archives at higheredlive.com. And remember, today's show is recorded, so you can share it with your colleagues who weren't able to tune in here today. I'm Tony Doody. Thanks for watching, everyone. Have a great week and do good work for our students. Take care.
Thanks a lot.